Hello, my name is Josh Schneps, and I'm the CEO of Schneps Media. I'm proud to be one of the hosts here this morning. We publish a lot of the local media outlets that you may pick up or read online, including the Long Island Press, Politics NY, Dan's Papers, Noticia Long Island. You may see our Beth page, Best of Long Island, throughout Long Island. But we're really thrilled to bring people together and give information. We have a stellar lineup of speakers and panelists. And I want to thank them for being here, giving their time, and really communicating what the future of energy on Long Island will be. There are especially a couple of thanks that I want to make. I want to thank Malloy University, beautiful campus, giving an opportunity to utilize this space. I don't know if the president is here as of yet, but he's supposed to be here, and I just want to give a thank you to him. I want to thank National Grid for hosting this event with us today and making it possible to really bring the industry together and hear a lot of different voices. In addition to our esteemed panel, we have some really special guests here that I want to recognize. New York State Senator Kevin Thomas. Marvin Holland, Chief of Staff for Senator Sanders. Rebecca Sheehan, Chief of Staff for Senator Kaplan. The Town of Hempstead Supervisor, Don Clavin, I know he's on the panel. Village of Rockville Center Mayor Fran Murray. Town of Babylon Councilman Dwayne Gregory. John Bendo, City of Long Beach Council Member. Liz Tristan, City of Long Beach Council Member. Suffolk County Legislator Stephanie Bontempi. And a special shout out to Ryan Stanton, Executive Director of the Long Island Federation of Labor. Patty Guidice, business manager of IBEW 1049, and really all the men and women of labor that make it possible for us to turn the lights on. I also want to thank the representative from the Suffolk County Executive for being here, as well as former Suffolk legislator Tom Silmy. That was a long list, but thank you all for being here. Thank you so much. So what we came here for is really to have a great dialogue on the future of energy on Long Island. And with that, I'd like to introduce our keynote speaker, who is Rudy Winter, President of National Grid, New York.
Thank you, Josh. Thanks. So don't be alarmed with keynote. This is more of an opening address, and less of saying to Pat of a keynote. There's Pat of a keynote. But thank you everyone for being here today to talk about energy future here on Long Island, a vitally important topic. But before I get into my opening comments, I also want to do a big shout out to Josh and the whole team at Schneps Media for organizing and pulling off this terrific event. So thank you to you and your whole team. Amazing work you've done here. But this conversation couldn't come at a better time as the Climate Action Council is finalizing their scoping plan on how New York will meet its Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act. Some of the most, I would say, progressive and in some ways forward-reaching environmental goals of any state in the country. And National Grid stands behind that. But we have to work with our partners in Albany, our partners here on Long Island, to make sure we comply with that and we move New York forward, but we do that in a way that leaves no one behind. Doesn't leave any customers behind, doesn't leave any workers behind, and it doesn't leave any communities behind on that journey as well. So thank you, first of all, for everyone in this room, all of your hard work in, I think, making Long Island a model for the rest of the country. A model in that Long Island is really viewed as an area that is embracing new energy sources, but at the same time, keeping all of our options on the table. One of the things at National Grid, we talk about Long Island as a great example of what would be a future energy hub. Here, we've got great solar projects out in Calverton, where there's easily enough solar out there for to power more than 4,000 homes. The solar out there and the batteries out there are the equivalent of taking about 4,000 cars off the road. At the same time, if you look at the waters surrounding Long Island, one day we're going to be seeing offshore wind out there. So while Long Island is integrating all of these new energy technologies, we're also looking at a hybrid model. How do we make sure we maintain a safe and reliable natural gas network at the same time? And how do we decarbonize that network? And there again, Long Island is leading the charge. Our partners out in Hempstead, we're working with them on the High Grid project, where at National Grid, we're going to be working with the town of Hempstead to blend hydrogen in with natural gas to heat about 800 homes out there. So that's why you see, why we look at Long Island as really a view of what the future could look like, blending the existing fossil infrastructure, decarbonizing it, while at the same time embracing economic, new, clean energy sources. So we're delighted to be here today, delighted to hear the panel, but probably more interested in all of you, you're all leaders in the community, learning, hearing new things today, and then taking that back with you. Your voices are respected in all circles across the island. Taking it back with you, because this is an important topic, and it's a topic where we need to have a very rational discussion about and a very fact-based discussion about. And that's what I think you're going to hear from our terrific panels today. So without further ado, I'll cut short my quote-unquote keynote, and let me turn it back over to Josh.
Thank you. So again, I really want to just say thank you to each and every one of you. I know we all live crazy lives, hectic schedules, and being here really to communicate your expertise and really what you're seeing. So why don't we just start off on the end with just 60 seconds, tell us who you are and what you do.
Eric Alexander, Director of Vision Long Island, also founder of the Long Island Main Street Alliance. We're focused on walkability, downtown revitalization, certainly support clean energy.
Donna, Drummond, Chief Expense Officer and Chief Sustainability Officer for Northwell Health.
Good morning, everyone. David Schieren, founder and CEO Empower Solar. We do residential and commercial solar, battery storage, EV charging.
Hi, Tom Falcone, CEO of LIPA. LIPA owns the electric grid here on Long Island, and we contract with PSEG so you get your bill from PSEG, but the money goes to a LIPA account. So I think that's a good summary.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Donald Chahbazpour from National Grid. I'm a director in our policy and regulatory strategy team.
Hello, Chris Voell. I'm the VP for Business Development for Nature Energy. We're actually a Danish-based company that does anaerobic digestion of food waste and animal manure and produce renewable natural gas from that. So glad to be here. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Brian Gilman from Evolve Hydrogen. We're producing a new form of hydrogen-producing electrolyzer from injection molding. It uses seawater. We're also focusing on creating a new green hydrogen industry right here on Long Island with our counterparts.
Morning all, Tristan Brown. I'm director of the Bioeconomy Development Institute at the SUNY College of Environmental Science and Forestry up in Syracuse. And a big part of my job is working with industry partners to develop and analyze decarbonization strategies under the CLCPA. Thank you.
Wow, you guys were quick. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. All right, let's start with Eric. We'll go right into it. Do you think local businesses and homeowners are aware of the changes that are proposed to generate green energy and the potential additional costs?
You know, look, folks are coming off a pandemic where for 2-3 years, government regulations have made some people poor, some businesses bankrupt, and it's a challenging time. And there are climate change deniers, and that's not good. There's also inflation deniers. There's people out there to say costs aren't going up. Costs are, and it's undeniable. Businesses have felt it, and I think residents have felt it. That's what we hear from the local communities that we work in. So while we all want a clean energy future, we got to do a better job, or clean energy present. We got to do a better job communicating. Number one. Number two, we've got to do a better job getting the prices down, the price points down. And then number three, instead of hectoring and blaming and attacking folks for not maybe being up to speed on the best solutions, we've got to really work with people where they are at and get them to a better place. And look, if that means getting more subsidies out there, and there's a real opportunity on the federal level, that, and there's more we can talk about with that, but I don't want to go on, but there's a part 2 to this. But anyway, I'll stop. Thanks.
All right, we'll get to that. Donna, Northwell is one of the largest employers on Long Island, if not the state. You have critical infrastructure. I think a lot of people would really love to hear how Northwell is looking at their energy use, not just now, but into the future.
Sure, thank you. So in 2010, under the leadership of our CEO, Michael Dowling, who's a true visionary, we signed a memorandum of understanding with the EPA, and we committed to reducing our footprint. Since then, we've spent over $7 million achieved over $20 million in return on that. We found ways to invest in our infrastructure, commissioning, LED lighting, those types of things across the system. And we've created a pool, and we continue to reinvest and make sure that we make those investments that are energy efficient for Northwell. Earlier this year, we signed a healthcare sector pledge from the U.S. Department of Health and Sciences. We committed to reduce our organizational emissions, scopes 1 and 2, by 50% by 2030, and we committed to achieve net zero by 2050. So at the same time, we're reducing our electricity usage, making sure it's from renewable resources, and reducing our total electricity usage overall. This commitment puts us at the forefront of healthcare in the country. We were also asked to respond to a request for information from the House Ways and Means Committee because we are identified as one of the leaders in this area. We have over 100 initiatives in 10 different groups on all other ways of reducing our footprint. Our employees are begging for this. They are energized. They want to make sure that we affect climate change, we improve it, so that we affect the health and welfare of our community. I could go into details for hours, but,
Thank you so much,
slides
Donna.
for that.
David, let's talk about solar. How is solar contributing to making energy on Long Island, and do you see it growing in the future?
Yes.
Please elaborate.
And I would just also share that Northwell, it's very true. Your employees, we happen to have a partnership with our firm, and such a very significant portion reach out to us and want to find ways to, use solar and batteries. The thing that's really striking about solar and battery and wind and clean tech in general is that it's anti-inflationary. Once you build it, you install it, you have a fixed cost to operate it over time. So the most, common product that we offer for homeowners is a 15 or 20-year loan where you have a fixed cost per kilowatt hour. And that contrasts quite significantly with the cost of grid power, which is volatile and increases over time, right? So, from a strategic national security, economic security standpoint, that makes a ton of sense. And from just a business and homeowner standpoint, that makes a lot of sense. There's a lot of room for growth. I think on the residential sector, still we're probably under 10%. I don't know the exact numbers. We are waiting on sort of a grid planning review, integrated resource plan, which I'll wait for Tom to comment on. But there's enormous room for growth, both on rooftop, ground mount, and so on.
Thank you so much. Tom, I would love to hear how LIPA is getting to a zero carbon grid.
Sure. So I'll share 3 numbers, and just to put things in context, the first is 0, and the second is 3,600, and the third is 60. So 0, 3,600, and 60. 0 is that zero carbon electric grid we have to get to by 2040, and Rudy mentioned the Climate Action Council. I'm one of the members of the council that sets the state's scoping plan of how we're going to get there. We spent a lot of time on the council debating the last 15 or 20% of that progress, but there's a lot of low-hanging fruit, and there's a lot of obvious things that can be done that get us to a, say, 80% reduction in gas emissions, greenhouse gas emissions in the electric grid that really aren't that, there's not much debate. It's current technology. It's a matter of deploying it at scale. But we spent a lot of our time in the last 15 or 20%, which is very technically challenging. But that said, we're going to solve the last 15 or 20% with the technology that exists in the future, not the technology that exists today. So that gets my second number, 3,600. 3,600 is the number of megawatts of clean energy resources that are going to hit the grid by 2030. 2030, we're in 2023 almost. So that's within the next 7 years, we're going to add 3,600 megawatts of solar and offshore wind and battery storage. And you might say, well, how much is 3,600 megawatts? Well, the whole grid is about 5,500 megawatts. So it's a lot. It's a lot. And so that's, David mentioned we do have a integrated resource plan coming out in the first quarter of next year that we're going to be talking about how we get all the way to 2040 in a zero carbon grid. But even if we just went Rip Van Winkle, if we did nothing else than what we've already contracted, that leads me to my third number. There would be a 60% reduction in the greenhouse gas emissions of the grid between now and 2030, just with what's already planned, already signed, already in the works, already in permitting, already being built. The one final thing I'd say, though, is it's not just building solar panels on roofs or offshore wind turbines or placing batteries. It's also making sure the whole thing works together. And in order to do that, we're going to have to build a lot of transmission, because currently the grid is built around certain power plants in certain places delivering energy. And we're going to get all this new energy that's located in different places and from different sources. And so we need to create more flexibility in the grid to make it all work together. But that, too, is something that we're actively working on, and we're going to be investing about $1.5 billion in the grid over the next 7 years to make that work. And there'll be further investments beyond that. But I would just say that, and wrap up on this, so it's zero, which is where we have to get by 2030, 3,600, the amount of power we're already getting, and 60% reduction in carbon emissions over the next 7 years if we did nothing else. But the vast majority of stuff people agree on. It's the last 20% that's the hurdle, and technology, I think, is going to solve much of that for us.
Thank you so much, Tom. Great to hear the investments being made. So, Don, when we spoke, we were talking about watching the news. And when you watch the news and hear everything that's happening around the world, and really it's impacting energy, and not just sources, but costs. So, we'd love really to hear from you. How is it going to impact the local communities here on Long Island when it comes to costs and supply?
Great. So, by the way, when Josh called me, he said, I want you to cover the world on what's happening. And I said, well, do I have 15 minutes, 5 slides? He's like, no, 90 seconds, no slides. So this is going to be a challenge, but I'll do my best. So let's just zoom out of Long Island for a second. We are now living in a global energy crisis. And it's not like the 70s. It's not an oil crisis. It's oil, gas, coal, lithium, and all the other minerals. Ukraine has made it a lot worse. And that's what the headlines that you've been seeing. Gas production in Russia has declined 40% over the last year. Right now, that gas is nowhere to go. Their storages are filled. It's not going anywhere. Their coal is already under sanction. When the next round of sanctions take place, which I think is the 6th or the 7th round, I think it's December 6th, Russian oil will not be going to EU. It will find its way into the global markets, but not into EU and UK. The price of energy has gone up by 600%. My colleagues in UK on average will tell you if you spend $200 a month, you're now spending $1,200 to $1,500 per month. So, Europe is in a really difficult position. They could have energy shortages. And then, Josh and I were chatting about this, and it ended up being 20 minutes. He said, so what does that mean in Long Island? I said, we've been having this debate a lot here in Long Island, that if the price of commodity goes up, people have said that's actually good for decarbonization, because that means you transition off fossil fuels faster. And the energy industry has been actually advocating the opposite, but I think Europe is now sort of exhibit A, where we are actually seeing the impact of high commodity prices and energy prices. And it's having the worst possible scenario in Europe. Costs are going up and emissions are going up, right? Coal is coming back in Europe, unfortunately, but also there is lack of investments in renewables, because when the cost of energy goes up, a lot of those are actually feedstocks to make all of the renewable sources that we need. So at least in Long Island, I think we can put that, hopefully that debate, to rest, that high energy prices are actually not good for decarbonization.
Thank you so much. Chris, we're going to talk about food waste, because I didn't realize in talking to you that food waste in landfills is really a major issue when it comes to releasing methane gas and impacting the environment. So we'd love for you to really share what you're working on to capture and use food waste in a greener capacity.
Sure. Thanks, Josh. I'm going to try to, I've been in the waste field here. I'm American, even though I work for a Danish company. I've been in the waste field since the mid-'80s. And, New York gets credit. New York has passed a food waste diversion law. I think it's early days in terms of its implementation. But I want to give a quick shout out to one of my sister company, I would say, American Organic Energy, who is building a food waste digester here on Long Island. And we hope to be able to make an investment for 10 to 20 of those projects. Some may be in Long Island, some may be upstate and in different places in the state. As you all know, there is plenty of food waste and food residuals that come from food production. All of those can be anaerobically digested, and we can capture renewable natural gas. This is done in Denmark at a large scale, and currently 30% of the natural gas grid in Denmark is renewable natural gas. I'm not necessarily suggesting that we can get there in Long Island or throughout New York, but it can be a very substantial energy source that comes from this food waste and from animal manure. Again, we see a lot of very positive signs in New York State, and that's why we're here to invest our dollars in this technology. And the great thing about renewable natural gas is that we can use an existing infrastructure, the natural gas infrastructure that exists, and get that energy source to where it makes the most sense, both economically, environmentally, from an environmental justice standpoint, where we can move that energy around. Yeah, Josh, I think I'll leave it at that for right now.
Terrific. Thank you so much. So Brian, it was really great talking to you and hearing how you're investing in green hydrogen here on Long Island. But to scale this business, what types of jobs are going to be needed, and really what type of production partners are you seeking?
Thank you for asking me that. Now, basically, what we're looking for Long Island is not just producing the product that I make, which is called Evolve, but also being able to install it, produce our component parts here on Long Island, and then start to make a bulk green hydrogen industry. It's going to mean a lot more jobs, jobs to integrate that with the new offshore wind happening off the shore of Long Island. It's going to mean jobs to package the hydrogen in a hydride, which is one of our partners, to ship it over to Europe or use it here in the States. It's going to produce jobs not only producing hydrogen, but with our product, making it better, meaning I'm needing jobs from people coming out of colleges to improve the technology. I need regular everyday workers to assemble Evolve units. It means jobs to underserved communities, because the devices we're making are simple enough for basically anybody to put together. Also, it means union jobs. It means electricians, plumbers, gas fitters. It means AI professionals. It means IT professionals. It means thousands of jobs for Long Island. And currently, we've got a few groups way up in the Cayuga region that are focusing on the very same thing. I live here on Long Island. I'd like to see it produced here as well, simply because we use seawater to make hydrogen, and you guys are in a very unique position because of that. Along with the offshore wind producing the power, which would be green energy, making the hydrogen from non-potable sources like seawater or waste-treated water gives you guys a definite advantage of making very inexpensive hydrogen. By the time 2030 comes around, you'll be paying $1 for the hydrogen if you've got a fuel cell car, or basically making a lot more revenue by making bulk hydrogen and exporting it to countries that really desperately want it right now. There's not enough electrolyzers being produced to keep up on the green hydrogen demand. This is where we have an advantage here, because we can produce our product in a fraction of the time. And that's how I see this affecting Long Island and the jobs here.
Terrific. Tristan, before I move on to you, I want to welcome and thank the Town of Hempstead Council Member Anthony D'Esposito. Thanks for being here. So Tristan, when we chatted, you were talking about the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, legislation that became law in 2019. It's very ambitious, 100% reduction of greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. And you're part of the Climate Action Council.
The advisory panels, the energy intensive and trade exposed industries.
So talk about how that panel is making recommendations for industrial uses to achieve that goal.
You know, when we think about decarbonization, especially the deep decarbonization required by the CLCPA, there's a popular belief that when we can just electrify everything and we'll hit the targets. And electricity is going to get us much of the way there, probably even most of the way there, but it's not going to get us all of the way there. And we're still going to require molecules, we're still going to require applications, sustainable aviation fuel, renewable diesel, hydrogen, applications where electrification does not meet the needs that you have. And with industry, this is especially true because industry requires very, very energy-dense fuels. It requires very high temperatures that you're not going to see in most applications. And so this was one of the main points of conversation on the Energy Intensive and Trade Exposed Industries panel was how do we support the types of technologies that are going to be required by energy-intensive industry in order to meet the CLCPA's requirements. And so this is where you have to take advantage of every low-carbon resource that you have available. Hydrogen is going to play a very large role. We don't have that hydrogen very available today, right, as we were just talking about. So this is where we start looking at, okay, renewable natural gas, major climate benefits that you don't get from any other technology. We can also produce it immediately. When we think about energy-dense fuels, renewable diesel, especially sustainable aviation fuel, right, you're not going to be flying on an electric commercial airliner. It's just the energy density of batteries is too far behind where you need to be. And so this is also an opportunity for Long Island, though, because Long Island has the ability to produce every single one of those fuels that I just mentioned. And so this is where when we talk about that transition that industry is going to have to go through in order to meet the CLCPA's requirements, it's a major challenge, but it's also a major opportunity for Long Island.
Thank you so much. I'm going to come around and ask each one of the panelists one more question. This is a great conversation, and again, thank you so much. Eric, you talked about the local community. You know, you have your ear to the ground. How do you feel that the costs, environmental impact, and options can be better communicated to both the general public as well as policymakers?
Yeah, so I think it's really a question of we got to, back to what I was saying earlier, we got to meet people where they are right now. Where are a lot of people right now? They don't trust big things. Big government, big business, big not-for-profits, big media. And they're going through their own personal economic pain in many cases and a lot of other disruptions, whether it be mental health, whether it be their kids, whether it be their lives. To many people, they're not excited about the new normal. They just want to get back to normal. Whereas many of us are excited about the new normal. Hey, we can do this, we can do that. Oh my God. A lot of great social and environmental engineering going on. But the public's that we hear is not there. So what do we have to do? We have to be sensitive and real to that, number one. We'd have to accept the fact that they're on board with certain things, more walking, more biking. There is support of transit. There is support of land use changes in our downtowns. These reduce greenhouse gas emissions. There is support of solar and wind and even the ideas of biogas folks get behind and geothermal if they can afford it, blah, blah, blah. But the bottom line is connecting to real people is going to be a pocketbook issue. So while we, like I said before, you don't want to be climate deniers, we also can't be inflation deniers and cost deniers to the impact of the changes at which we seek has to match people's ability to manage their lives and pay for their lives. So either it's inflation's got to, whether it be the subsidies have to go up radically, the cost of the industry has to go down on some of these technologies, or we've got to more slowly transition in certain areas. And look, if you got to get rid of something that's cost prohibitive like oil, that's insane, but not, if natural gas is a transition fuel or certainly find the subsidies to get the solar going. I see David here does a great job, and there's many other folks that are out there communicating to residents and businesses about these opportunities, but also a lot of businesses and residents just don't know about this stuff. We assume they do because we all know and read the emails a million times, but they're not plugged into it the way we are. This is a room of experts here, and we all talk to each other a lot. So we got to get out and talk to people that we don't normally talk to, and spend that time. Spend 20 minutes talking to someone who makes egg sandwich. Try to understand what their life's like right now, in real time. So you know, I don't know, those are my thoughts. I don't want to go on because there's a lot of intelligence here that we're going to hear from today. Thank you.
Well, luckily, I'm not big media, I'm small media, so you have to make sure you trust your local news outlet. It's okay, no problem.
Just being candid.
So Donna, I want to talk to you about waste. Obviously, you feed thousands of people needles, there's many other waste produced from the hospitals and your centers. How are you looking to reduce waste, both from a purchasing perspective and recycling perspective?
Sure, thank you. So first, I want to just mention, we have a number of initiatives in place of what other panelists have spoken about. We're working on a hydrogen hub with National Grid at one of our hospitals. We have a food digester at one of our hospitals, and we are working with a company called Envitech to, it's like a food digester for lab supplies. Think of all the lab tests, particularly in these days of COVID, and all of the supplies that need to be processed and make sure that they don't end up in a landfill. So we're looking at all those initiatives and expanding them across the organization. Waste in all of its forms, including unnecessary utilization of services, is how we look at waste. Of course, we have recycling initiatives in place. We just hired a phenomenal employee from a new team member from the New York City Department of Sanitation to focus on increasing our recycling across our organization. Again, our employees are very, very active and want to be involved in that and make sure that they do their part. And we want to make sure that it ends up where it's supposed to be. But we also look at waste in forms of the OR. Are we opening supplies just to have them there and ready, or can we just have them there and ready without opening them so that they can be used again? What are the things that we can do? Our clinicians are very much on board with this. What can we do in the ambulatory settings as well as in the OR? What anesthetic gases we use? There's anesthetic agents that are much more harmful to the environment than others. So we work with our anesthesiologists to make the wise choices. Clinical quality always comes first. But if there's equivalent products that will get you to that quality goal, can you choose a product that's less harmful on the environment? We are looking at the concept of a circular economy as well as opposed to the buy, use, waste that healthcare is frankly known for. How can we move to that? How can we pivot? We've hired a new physician, a head of VP of Resource Stewardship for the health system. How can we focus on these efforts to reduce waste? So we're making the investments that we need to make. And I've been in healthcare for 20 years and banking before that. I've never, ever had a position where people are just excited and raising their hands. Everybody's aware of it. I agree with you. We need to educate more. People need to understand, but they do have a basic understanding and they're willing to participate. So we have a Greenberg, I'm sorry, I know I'm going a little long here. We have a business employee resource group. Some of our leaders of that group are here. We have over 500 members of that group. They come together, they want to hear about what we're doing, and most importantly, they want to know what they can do.
It's really good to hear that Northwell is taking this initiative, because I know particularly on Long Island, it really is one of the largest organizations and really such a visual organization, because everyone is really touched by you one way or the other. So it's really great to hear those initiatives, and hopefully other organizations will follow the lead. David, back to you and the solar conversation. Talk about how solar will complement other sources of energy, including wind.
So I'll let Tom speak to the offshore capacity and what the intent is with that. But we need all the wind, we need all the solar we can get, and perhaps I'm understanding renewable natural gas and hydrogen. We need it's an all of the above solution. But yes, solar is an intermittent, generation source, and that's a big issue. We need to provide energy to consumers and businesses 24/7, right? Now, the way to manage solar as an intermittent source is you add a battery, right? And that's becoming much more common for us to attach a battery system to a home solar power system or a commercial installation. So that's a critical way to add your resiliency and dispatchability to your distributed generation energy source. But the fact that we have this amazing offshore resource is fabulous, and we need to harness all of that we can possibly get. But I would say it's such an exciting moment in time because the battery technology is improving. We had a little bit of an issue here with prices because what we've experienced the past decade with solar prices, they've come down dramatically. And the incentives, in fact, there used to be a rebate on Long Island for solar, for residential solar, now there's none. Why? Because they're cost effective today without it. And we do get a tax credit from the federal government and the state. Battery technology similarly is following this downward cost trend, except over the past year it's come back up. And that's a bit troubling. However, we do see that kind of leveling off and coming back down over the next 5 years. It's just the reality of the inflationary cycle that we have. But, you know, just to maybe put a quote on that point, you know, if you asked me 2 years ago, and Tom and I were talking about this, you know, we saw solar plus battery being at parity to what solar costs alone today, maybe in 5 years. That's pushed out a little bit now, but we're still going to hit that. We're still going to get to a point where solar plus battery delivers cost savings from day one. Today, solar does deliver cost savings from day one. There's an important distinction there.
Thank you so much. Tom, let's talk about the end user, the customer. How are you helping those customers transition to more green and efficient modes of both transportation and heating?
Thank you. You know, I'd go to where Eric's comments are. You have to meet people where they are, but two stats here too, 15 and 85. So 15% is the amount of the state's carbon emissions that come from electricity. So while we talk about making the electric grid zero carbon, the strategy really is you make the electric grid zero carbon and then you electrify things like heating and transportation. That's the only way you get to the second number, which is 85. An 85% reduction in economy-wide carbon emissions, which is the state's goal. So much like Eric says, how do you meet people where they are? You have to educate them, you have to offer incentives, you have to offer programs. The good news is that the technology is already there. So let me just give you an example. If you live in Suffolk County, and you probably don't even have natural gas service, 40% of Long Island heats with oil. If you heat with oil, and you have central air conditioning, which 95% of Long Islanders do, and you don't have a heat pump, then you just spend more than you need to for energy. You could put a heat pump in today, you could cut your heat bill in half, you could cut your carbon emissions in half. And that isn't even including the newly passed federal tax incentives for heat pumps that just went in with the Inflation Reduction Act. What's the problem? Why aren't more people doing it? I mean, if oil costs a lot and it costs a lot to heat my home, why aren't more Long Islanders putting in a heat pump? What is a heat pump? A lot of people don't even know. Essentially just an air conditioner. I mean, it essentially looks exactly the same as your central air conditioning unit that you already have. If you walk by one, you wouldn't even be able to tell the difference. Does it change how you heat your home or do anything? No, not really. You wouldn't know. Doesn't change what you need to do. Why don't more people do it? Because they don't know about it. When the air conditioning unit breaks, the fella who goes out and says, I'm going to put it in the new unit, doesn't sell the heat pump. Doesn't say, hey, by the way, if you could spend, let's take an average Suffolk home, $6,000 to replace the central air conditioning unit. If you spent $9,000, you'd get a heat pump, but LIPA would give you $2,000 back as a rebate. So you're only out $1,000, and you'd cut your heating bill by $1,000 a year. Your break even is a year, right? Someone has to educate, help educate not only the consumer, but also the installer. So what are we focused on? Rebate programs, taking advantage of the newly passed Inflation Reduction Act, but going to be spending a lot of time on helping our tradesmen that are actually going out and are on the site when that air conditioner breaks, because that's the part in the cycle where people are making that choice, and they can make a better choice, not only for carbon, but for their home budget. And today, with today's technology, and it's green, it's not just good for the environment, it's good for their wallet, it's good for their pocketbook. So there's a lot of opportunities like that. We're doing similar things on EVs. Limited time, I'm not going to go into it, but just say that's how do you get an 85% carbon-wide reduction? You have to use pick up a lot of that low-hanging fruit that's there and meet people where they are and think about where the real problems are that keep people from making choices that are good choices that they can make that would save them money and save carbon today.
Thank you so much, and thank you for being here and communicate that. I think I'm hearing a recurring theme here about education and really letting the consumers know what options there are. So a lot of good stories that we're going to follow up with each of you on to help communicate that to our readers. Don, there's a lot of advocacy groups that want to get to electrification, and they want to be in a position that everything should be electrified. So I'd really like you to talk through, A, is it possible? And B, what is National Grid's standpoint on the issue?
Yes. So let me just start out by saying that electrification is a significant piece of the puzzle, but it's not by itself sufficient, right? It's not the silver bullet. And to get an appreciation why you can't electrify everything, it's quite nuanced, but I'll break it up into sort of two categories of what I would say upstream and downstream challenges. Upstream means in terms of production, the amount of energy that you would need. So let's say you take 10 gigawatts, and you don't need to know what 10 gigawatts basically means, but New York City peaks about 10 gigawatts. New York City actually peaks about 10 gigawatts. If you got rid of 10 gigawatts of natural gas generation, and you said, I just want to change that and swap that out with only solar and wind and battery, you would need about 30 gigawatts. It's a 3-to-1 ratio because of the intermittency of solar and wind. So for reliability reasons, it's not a one-for-one swap. So that's the first part of the piece that's, what I mentioned is quite nuanced. The second piece is that that's only part of the story. The thermal load that goes from the gas to electric, you would then have to really overbuild the electric system. And one of the statistics that's not widely understood, and if you remember one thing from this panel, at least from my perspective, is the gas network today, on its peak day, which will happen in February, 6 a.m. in February, delivers 3 to 4 times more energy on its peak day than the electric system does on its peak day. So if you are shifting all that heating load, you really have to multiply the 30 gigawatts I told you by a factor of 2 or 3. That's the upstream limitations of why you can't electrify everything. Downstream, which means at the customer level. First, the distribution network can't handle it everywhere. So you actually have to replace some of the wires and the conduits that actually go to your home to be able to supply that amount of wattage if you do electrify everything. And then the last piece is to be at your house, the customer. We looked at it as National Grid. Cost of a retrofit is about $20,000 to $35,000. And given what I do for a living, I'm actually very curious. I live in a very average, middle-class, sort of suburban house. So I called someone to convert my house that was built in the 1970s for gas. It would cost $26,000 to convert it, right? $26,000 to go for a heat pump. So, and then given our plan, and Rudy provided a really great overview, is our perspective is that basically by 2050, half of our customers will use electric heat, and then the other half will be this combination of a hybrid. They will what we call dual fuel heating systems or hybrid, where you have basically a heat pump and a gas furnace or a gas system that's running on RNG and hydrogen. It's much more nuanced, but I think it's much more practical. And then the last piece I'll tell you about to get a good perspective of why you can't electrify everything. If you just wanted to electrify the city of New York to get to 30% of the buildings, you would need to convert 225 buildings every week between now and 2050. That's 30%. So if you want to convert 90%, that would be almost 700 buildings. So it's to also get an appreciation of the scale of the challenge if you just basically advocated that I'm going to use electrification as the only lever to get to net zero.
That's pretty breathtaking, those numbers. And thank you for sharing. Chris, when we spoke, you were talking about Denmark and how Denmark has been utilizing renewable natural gas, and it's evolved over time there to be a major part of their grid. So can that be an example here and accomplished here?
I think so, and I jumped the gun a bit on my earlier answer, I think, Josh, but just to repeat, in Denmark, due to food waste, animal manure, and other agricultural residuals going into anaerobic digesters, the country currently has 30% of the natural gas grid that's renewable natural gas. A more realistic expectation for New York State, I've heard several different numbers. Tristan can probably correct me when he speaks, but I've heard anywhere from 5 to 15%. That's still very, very significant for Long Island and for the state of New York. Most people in this room are probably familiar with composting, and I'm not anti-composting, but that technology has been around a long time, and a lot of folks would say, hey, we can use composting for all of our food waste and other things. I'm suggesting that's not the answer. I've been in this for about 30 years. I think it's time we need to start scaling our technologies. We need to go bigger with that, and we need to have larger quantities of these materials that we're capturing and producing renewable natural gas from. You know, as I said earlier, I think New York State has a lot of potential from a feedstock perspective. I would offer that there are some policy changes that need to occur. And, you know, we've been talking quite a bit about the Electrify Everything movement. I think I would agree with Don and what others have said that, yes, while we can electrify a fair bit of our technology and our energy needs, we can't do it all. There was a study by the Danish Energy Agency where they looked at the theoretical maximum for everything that could be electrified in the country, and that was about 75%. And that was a theoretical maximum. So there was still 25%, and more realistically, even more, where additional energy sources to wind and solar and other and heat pumps and other technologies are going to be needed. And I think New York State is in that same boat. Yes, I think if we do a better job capturing a lot of food waste, agriculture is a big part of the economy. I realize that's not in Long Island, but for the state as a whole, and to give those people kind of the right to operate, you know, we think that these type of systems can help them stay whole and operating.
We still have nice farms on the North Fork. So Brian, you talked about creating hydrogen. What energy sources are you utilizing to do that?
Well, for Long Island, that would be offshore wind and solar. You know, very little of it would probably come from the grid energy. In other places in New York State, for instance, let's say in the Finger Lakes region, it would be a combination of solar and National Grid's green grid already coming from hydroelectric. And that's basically how to you know, make sure not only the energy is green, but actually start getting cheaper rates. Because with the offshore wind, and what we've seen with other countries is when these things start going at full tilt, they can overrun the power grid that hasn't been upgraded for that, obviously. Why waste electrons? You might as well store it in hydrogen and make a cash cow out of it, basically. A fraction of that will go back into the energy grid, converted from hydrogen back to electricity. The rest of it would be used for other industries like steel, ammonia, oil and gas. You need oil. Oil and gas needs hydrogen to refine that oil and gas. You need it for plastics, you need it for methanol, you need it for food production, you need it for all sorts of chemistry. Those are the things that we got to look at with hydrogen. It's not just an energy solver for, I'd say maybe like about 30% of it, but it also, we consume a lot of hydrogen. We don't even know about it. America produces about 40% of the world's hydrogen, but they do it from gray or blue hydrogen sources, meaning natural gas or other form of fossil fuels. They are starting to feel the pinch because a lot of the renewable energy credits are being taken away from things that are using fossil fuels to make them. So there are several groups here in America that are losing about 10% of their profits because it came from those wrecks. And they're looking to green hydrogen to fill in the blanks. And, you know, it's an interesting point in history where we need groups, areas like Long Island to actually step up to the plate and say, yeah, we're going to do this, and we're going to actually make an economy off of it and help out with a lot of solutions here. The one thing about this, and I need to throw in the environment a little bit, for every kilo of hydrogen we make about 8 kilos of oxygen. Now, I haven't found enough markets to put the oxygen out there. So it's a good way to offset the environmental problems that we've made with carbon. by using, by either releasing the oxygen in the air or using it in things like waste treatment plants to break down solids faster, using in riverways to help reduce fish kills, give the fish a fighting chance. Even groups in Europe are looking at that particular model to help with their fish farms. So.
Well, thank you for making that investment here in Long Island. So last question, Tristan, for this panel, and I want to thank the panel again. It's a pretty fitting question, a big picture question. Don, you touched on it. Will we be able to replace fossil heat completely with electricity by 2050?
With electricity, it's doubtful. It would be a mighty big task, and there's a couple of reasons for that. But the biggest one is, so if you look at the work the Climate Action Council has done, and it's phenomenal work, right? In the last 3 years. But the biggest part of the work has been determining how much it's going to cost to fully implement the law. And the benefits are going to be huge. There is no disputing that. But the costs are going to be tremendous as well. And this is not something that has really been tackled yet, how we're going to cover those costs. And the reason I bring that up is because we have to pay for that. And we are already one of the highest tax states in the country, right? It's not as if we have a huge amount of flexibility to increase our tax base, which means we really need to figure out how we're going to pay for this as cost effectively as possible. And that means utilizing the infrastructure that we have on hand wherever we can. Because if we want to completely replace fossil heat with electricity, we have to implement a massive build out in our existing electricity infrastructure, right? It's not, we don't have all the transmission lines, distribution lines, right? The full infrastructure that we would need to completely electrify our heating system. And so we have to build that out, which would be incredibly expensive. An alternative is we utilize our existing natural gas infrastructure using hydrogen blending, using renewable natural gas, resources that we have available today and will have available in the future, and we can hit those targets for decarbonizing the heating system much more cost effectively. Now, you're going to be doing a great deal of electrification of heat. There's going to be many areas where heat pumps make a tremendous amount of sense and are very, very cost effective. But when we talk about completely decarbonizing the heating system, this is where we need to take advantage of the resources that we have available rather than going for some ideal that is going to be incredibly expensive to implement.
Well, I want to thank each and every one of you for really a great, informative, and honest conversation. So thank you so much.
All right, good morning, everyone. Before I jump into these remarks, we're going to show a video. But before I do that, I want to come back to something that Rudy started off with, which is how important this discussion is. That was a fantastic panel, and Jim Flannery and I have spent the last couple of days having a very similar conversation, sharing this video that you're about to see, and having a very similar conversation with the folks who operate and maintain our power plants here on Long Island. Now, those are folks who live here in the communities, and they have a ton of questions. So to Eric's point, we really need to have that conversation, educate, and have this dialogue. So if we could show the video, and then we'll come back for some remarks.
National Grid has a vision to bring clean energy to neighborhoods, improve the lives of residents, and help lessen the impacts of climate change through clean energy hubs across the Northeast. One clean energy hub already in progress is on Long Island, where we are generating clean energy through solar, developing offshore wind in the New York Bight, exploring repurposing our power plants to run on clean hydrogen, deploying battery energy storage systems, and upgrading the transmission network. With renewable energy sources and new technologies working together, the region can drastically cut emissions and become an environmental haven for residents. National Grid is creating a cleaner, fossil-free tomorrow, not only on Long Island, but throughout the Northeast.
Yeah, as Josh said, my name is Will Hazlip, and I'm the president of National Grid Ventures for the Northeast U.S. Now, National Grid Ventures operates alongside our regulated utility businesses in the U.K. and here in the U.S., developing, operating, investing in businesses and projects to accelerate a clean energy future. With the Northeast U.S. business, we've taken a holistic view of what's needed for the energy transition by bringing together clean energy generation, electric transmission, energy storage, and conventional generation, which is needed to keep the lights on and the AC flowing throughout the transition. Many of the projects we work on are located right here in the state of New York and actually on Long Island, which you saw in the video. So back in September, at the start of Climate Week NYC, National Grid introduced a model to develop and deliver a large-scale, clean and fossil-free energy hub across Long Island. Now, we think this can serve as an innovation beacon for the region and the entire United States. And we believe in a future where clean energy hubs will populate the region and accelerate the use of clean energy. Now, that's our clean energy vision. The Long Island Clean Energy Hub, outlined in our clean energy vision, contains 4 key components working together. Those are developing more clean and carbon-free energy from offshore wind and solar, using those renewable sources to create clean fuel like hydrogen to fuel power plants and heat homes, energy storage to store the wind and solar for later use, and modernizing and expanding the transmission networks to deliver more clean and carbon-free energy to the customers and communities. And of course, underpinning all of that is a lot more electricity use from electrifying things like transportation and heat. And we also have to keep the existing generating plants we have operating reliably throughout this transition. So here are the new projects on Long Island that are coming together to create this cohesive clean energy hub. Solar. In Riverhead, New York, we developed the Calverton Solar Center in a designated disadvantaged community, and it powers over 4,000 households and reduces carbon emissions equivalent to removing 4,000 cars from the road. In offshore wind, we're developing in the New York Bight with RWE through a joint venture we call Community Offshore Wind. Our lease, which is positioned between Long Island and New Jersey, has the capacity to power over 1 million homes and businesses in the Northeast. We're currently preparing proposals for NYSERDA and are hoping to deliver that power to Long Island and New York. In generation, we operate conventional generating plants today that are fueled by oil and gas. Now, we're exploring replacing some of that infrastructure to create power plants that run on clean hydrogen made from renewable energy sources. This type of generation, it's this type of generation that can be ramped up and used for as long as needed, and that'll be critical for places like Long Island that have limited connections with other regions. Our goal is to provide clean, reliable power generation that's scaled to match the needs of the region. In storage, we've deployed battery energy storage systems in East Hampton and Montauk. These systems today are decreasing emissions and accommodating demand during the busy summers on the southeast end of Long Island. Battery storage solutions go hand in hand with renewable energy sources so that we can provide reliable energy to customers at all hours of the day. Electric transmission. Because more renewables require more transmission to deliver electricity to communities, we have a plan to modernize and upgrade the network on parts of Long Island under New York Transco, which is a company owned by National Grid and the other utilities in New York. This plan will improve reliability and resiliency while allowing the system to deliver more renewable energy to demand centers. Long Island is on its way to becoming a clean energy hub that can serve as a model for communities in the Northeast and throughout the country. Throughout each clean energy investment that we are making, we believe it's critical to recognize the significant impact of infrastructure development on communities and put them first. That's exactly why we named our offshore wind joint venture with RWE Community Offshore Wind, because we put communities first. Our projects also grow local economies, create jobs, contribute tax revenue, and lift up the communities in the Northeast. But we also recognize that some people may believe that these projects will impact their bills, create major construction in their town, leading to more traffic, or obstruct a view. It's exactly why community investment is so crucial. We are engaging with the residents of the towns where we will be making clean energy investments because we are interested in their interests, and we want to improve their neighborhoods beyond bringing clean energy. We know that we can use our clean energy projects to drive workforce development and improve environmental justice in New York. For example, our Calverton Solar Energy Center sits in a town that's a designated disadvantaged community. We're also making a $1.5 million community benefit payment to the town of Riverhead, and the project was constructed by Hawkeye, a local Long Island contractor. And we've been working on training our workforce in the conventional generation business for several years in both offshore wind and solar. In the first few months of launching community offshore wind, we've contributed to the community by revitalizing oyster habitats in the waterways of Long Island. We've partnered with the YMCA chapters in downstate New York to fund swim lessons for children in underserved communities, which not only provides them with an essential life skill, but it also builds a potential future workforce for offshore wind. The ability to swim is a requirement for maritime careers like offshore wind. In partnering with the Hudson River Community Sailing to offer lessons in wind and sailing to New York City public school students from underserved communities. Now, this provides STEM education and again prepares a future offshore wind workforce. So you can see just how important community investment is as we create clean energy hubs of the future. The work we do in National Grid Ventures complements the work of our regulated utility businesses. New York has some of the most aggressive environmental targets of any state in the United States. In between National Grid Ventures and our regulated businesses, our collective portfolio of clean energy investments goes further than anyone else in helping New York achieve these targets, and that portfolio will only grow over time. We're innovating right now to accelerate the transition to clean energy so that we can deliver a fossil-free future safely, reliably, and efficiently. And together we can create clean energy hubs that collectively achieve that goal. Thank you.
All right, well, I want to thank you all again for being here and taking the time to be here. I really thought that first panel was great, so you guys got a lot to live up to here. So again, why don't we just start off with introductions. Please just share with the audience who you are and what you do.
Well, thanks, Josh. And thanks for inviting me here today. My name is Pat Guidice, and I'm the business manager with the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, Local Union 1049. Now, we represent the utility workers on Long Island, working for both National Grid US and PSEG Long Island. We also represent the people that work in contractor groups like Hawkeye Construction that are also working on many of the projects that are moving our island's grid forward. I do want to thank you, take a point of personal privilege though, Josh, and thank you for putting this all together, because I think education for the public is the most important thing we can do. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi. Good morning, everybody. My name is Barika Williams. I'm the Executive Director of the Association for Neighborhood and Housing Development, or ANHD as we are known. We are a nonprofit policy and advocacy organization in New York City. We were created by the original nonprofit community development corporations that are doing 100% affordable housing in New York City, and now represent more than 80 nonprofit neighborhood members that develop, manage, build, and occupy affordable housing in all 5 boroughs. And I am happy to be here, so thank you for the invitation.
Thank you.
Hi, good morning. My name is Tara Schneider. I work with the Town of Hempstead Department of Conservation and Waterways, and I've been involved with some of the renewable energy and sustainability projects for the town, including the High Grid project in partnership with National Grid that we'll talk about today.
Good morning, everyone. Anthony D'Esposito. I serve as a councilman in the town of Hempstead, a position I've held since 2016. Supervisor Clavin sends his regards. He had to, unfortunately, pick up his son from the nurse's office, so I am pitch hitting here. So if you see me refer to some notes, my parents always told me to be prepared, but I found out about this about 10 minutes ago, so.
Well, thank you both for filling in. We appreciate it.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Peter Florey. I'm a principal with the D&F Development Group. We're based here on Long Island. We are developers and builders and managers of 100% affordable housing, predominantly here on Long Island. We started off in Queens, but we have moved out, and we almost exclusively work now here on Long Island, building and operating affordable housing. Thank you.
Well, good morning, everybody. Neil Lewis. I'm the Executive Director of the Sustainability Institute at Malloy University. I work primarily out of our Suffolk campus over on Route 110, which I mentioned because we just moved our office. Very excited about. I facilitate a project we call the Long Island Clean Energy Leadership Task Force, which we've been running for many years now. And we primarily serve a kind of convening function to bring Long Island leaders and energy issues together. And we work particularly with local government. Always pleased to see town governments represented in programs like this, because we believe a lot of these issues do come down to actions at the local level. So that's a little bit about our program.
Thank you again for hosting us.
My name is Julie Ty. I'm president of the New York League of Conservation Voters and the New York League of Conservation Voters Education Fund. We are a statewide advocacy organization with a chapter here on Long Island, although Ryan calls me out every time I say in Long Island, because I am not from Long Island, as I think my accent belies. We advocate for clean energy, clean transportation, open space, clean water, and I would be remiss if I didn't tell everyone early voting starts on Saturday, and flip your ballot over unless you live in Nassau County. Look for that bond act.
Good morning, everyone. Myself, Pradeep Kaleti. I'm the Director of Future of Heat and Asset Engineering within National Grid. Essentially, what my team does is we are very agnostic for any one particular technology. We look at all technologies on which makes energy at a much affordable, safe, reliable, and make it sustainable. Right? We make sure our customers have the choice to pick, and they don't really have to make a choice between high-costing energy versus sustainable energy. We make sure we can bridge both of them. It can be sustainable, and it's also affordable for the customers. Thank you.
Thank you. This is a great panel, great mix of people with different insights, and I'm really, again, thankful for you being here. Pat, your members are on the ground. They are the men and women that execute a lot of these big projects that are coming down the pipeline. And we're talking about how everybody wants a cleaner and greener energy, and they want to get there as quickly as possible. But what do you feel needs to be taken into consideration to get there both properly and safely?
You know, it's important to remember the utility industry across Long Island and anywhere in the United States today. Providing energy to consumers out there is it's an important job to do. I mean, economies rise and fall on access to safe, reliable, and economical energy. But we often forget about the people that are working every day, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, not just to produce that product, but also to maintain the system that delivers that product to homes and businesses. Now, I've been in this business for 42 years, and I can tell you this, the industry provides good jobs. People pay into they pay their rates to receive that product, but in turn for that, we're putting back into the local economy by creating good jobs, by making sure that these good jobs are available, not just for us today, but for future generations going forward. So we need to keep in mind all the time how we protect that type of work. Now, we know it's going to evolve. We know it's going to change. We talked earlier about transitioning from the fossil fuel generators to cleaner energy sources. We're not climate deniers. We also understand that we are going to evolve. But we can't make that evolution at the peril of providing good jobs which put into the local economies. We need to continue to look at how our evolution changes that dynamic and how it affects all of us, because we're part of the fabric of the community.
Well, thank you for all the work you and your members do. I want to welcome and thank former New York State Senator Todd Kaminsky. He's here somewhere. Hello, Todd. Thank you for being here. So, Barika, your arms are around affordable housing, and I think it would be important for you to share what factors need to be taken into account really for affordable housing development when it comes to transitioning to green energy sources.
So I think it's important to remember that for the affordable housing sector, we're talking about buildings on the new construction side, on the preservation side, so whether you're acquiring an asset and rehabbing it, or preservation in terms of repositioning in terms of financing, and in terms of the management, But all of those things, the uniform element for us is our members are operating with 100% affordable housing projects, right? So they are not operating with mixed income buildings where they're able to pull some of the market rate units and cash flow that is a building is intaking from those units and cross-subsidize within a building. And they're operating within city, state, and often federal, all three regulatory agreements. And so their incomes are limited in terms of what their residents are earning. Their rents are limited. What they can do at any point in time in terms of capital improvements, in terms of purchasing a new boiler, in terms of, for us in New York City, Local Law 97 is what we call it. This is the local law that applies specifically to buildings, trying to reduce the building carbon emissions down 80% in the course of about 50 years. It's really an appreciation of we're operating on very thin margins, and that any added cost and any shifts need to come with an appreciation of how and where those resources are going to come from. It's not that affordable housing developers and building managers don't want to do this, because they very much know and see that. Their residents are some of the, especially in New York City, but I know this is true in Long Island as well, because I used to work statewide. It's the same residents. It's many of our communities that have highest asthma rates, who are very concerned about the impacts of buildings and building health. But we have to be able to provide these buildings the resources in order to be able to make the energy and climate shifts that they need for their buildings.
Thank you so much. So I guess to the council member and Tara, you know, either one of you can answer these questions or both give insights on them. But it was pretty impressive for me to personally learn about the town of Hempstead and some of the initiatives that are taking place. So the town of Hempstead has created a Vision 2040 plan and has a renewable energy park at Point Lookout. So perhaps you each can share how green energy is being produced there and how you think it could be expanded upon to meet the goals of that vision plan.
Sure. So first, I want to thank everyone for being here this morning, and thank to the partners who put this together. So Vision 2040 was an idea that we came up with on the town board, surprisingly, in actually a bipartisan fashion. It's a roadmap. It's our roadmap for the largest town in the nation, to maintain our 1,200 miles of roadway and to make sure that our nearly 4,000 members of our CSEA workforce are able to travel from point A to point B in keeping our communities working. It's a roadmap for a cleaner, greener fleet that we hope will run entirely on green energy by 2040. We've already begun the transition to green energy, as you refer to our energy park and Point Lookout. So I'm just going to focus on some of the things that we have going at the energy park. There's a hydrogen fueling station, which we've talked about, and I know Tara will elaborate a little bit later. It's the first hydrogen fueling station on Long Island. There's also 2 solar-powered electric vehicle charging stations, 3 charging ports with associated solar canopies. Each port has the power for 2 electric-powered cars at 240 volts. And what's great to see is a lot of people visit our beaches along the South Shore, whether it's Point Lookout or Lido or even Long Beach, and they park their cars during the day to charge and then come back later at night. So it's something that we've really been happy to see being utilized by so many people that live in the town of Hempstead, not just along the South Shore, but throughout, even up north. We have 2 wind turbines down in the area, both in Point Lookout and Lido. I'm sure many of you have seen when you've traveled to our South Shore beaches. So we are trying to really be at the forefront of renewable energy by taking care and moving forward this roadmap for 2040. Like I said, we are the largest town in the nation, and we try to lead by example. We are proud of the steps that we're taking to move America's largest town forward.
That's terrific. Tara, do you want to give any input on that, or would you like to take the next question when it comes around to you? No pressure.
That's okay. Yeah, I think what I would add is what we really looked to demonstrate when we first built the Renewable Energy Park was to show a diversity of technologies, to show not only solar, but green hydrogen. Back then, wasn't called green hydrogen. It was over 10 years ago. We were looking to show zero emissions hydrogen that we're producing on site with wind power, and specifically the storage of that intermittent renewable energy was a big priority for us. So that's a big part of the vision that was there, and also what was echoed, I think, across the first panel was to fix energy costs and to be able to use renewable energy in order to fix energy costs, which I think is especially, an important issue today.
Thank you so much. So Peter, you're actually building and developing here on Long Island, and really would love for you to share the measures that you're implementing in your buildings or what you plan on implementing to be more green.
Thanks, Josh. Yeah, so I think it's no secret that trying to build anything on Long Island is a challenge, and when you insert the word affordability in front of that, that challenge grows exponentially. So it's incumbent upon us as developers, to deliver a product that is state-of-the-art, that is beautifully designed, and then is well managed. And there are huge challenges. I mean, we're developing residential multifamily buildings that are 1/2 to 1/3 the rents that our other market rate developers are putting on the market. And how do we do that? Well, we do that with a combination of equity generated through tax credits. So there's the private sector is involved in that. But we also have to conserve a lot when we're in capital costs as we're developing these buildings. We have to conserve, as was already pointed out, not only on the build, but on the operating side. And because tax credits are a very scarce resource, there is a challenge in terms of trying to allocate those in the most effective and efficient manner. So what we have done over the years, and has evolved, and it has also become part of the requirement, a lot of these credits are allocated through the state of New York, as they are in every state. Part of that allocation process requires now, that encourages and in some cases requires that these buildings are more energy efficient, that these are high performing buildings, that they're properly designed, that we pay particular attention to things like venting and leak-free ductwork, efficient hot water design, efficient appliances, and lighting. And we also look where we can to locate our buildings near transit areas, near train stations, near bus stops, and in downtowns where we can. We implement all these measures, and then we're tested. Something called a HERS test, which is heating energy, home energy rating system. Most homes, HERS score come in around 100 to 120. We're aiming to be below 50. And the way that test is conducted in our case is that they literally come in, there's a consultant that comes in and literally tests our buildings to extract the air at the door, out of the unit, to test to see if there are any leaks in the system. And it's a nerve-wracking system, nerve-wracking test that we have to go through every time we build a building, but it's important. And it clearly demonstrates that these are truly energy efficient units. So those are some of the measures that we've implemented. There are more. We're very interested in moving, into the geothermal and into solar. We haven't gotten there yet. We're finding it's more and more difficult to find solar suppliers that want to sell to multifamily builders. So if there are anybody out there who has that, we'd be very interested in hearing from them. So, and of course, we're active now in EV stations too. We're implementing those in all of our new buildings. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Neil, when we were talking, you were, in your role, you were communicating with a lot of the local towns. We heard about Hempstead in terms of the initiatives that they're taking. I would love to hear from you what other towns and villages on Long Island are doing to advance clean energy.
Okay, great stuff. Tara and was just talking about the Clean Energy Park at Hempstead. We were just there on behalf of one of the projects here at Malloy just last week. So it's a really great program there. New York State is a home rule state. So one of the things we have to ask ourselves is what can towns do and villages to that effect also to promote clean energy. And one of those is the power over codes. And so part of what Peter just talked about with HERS rating, that is the law in the town of Hempstead for all new home construction. We wrote a white paper on this many years ago, and we were able to get 10 towns on Long Island to adopt this as the requirement. Codes, however, don't sit still. So we're pushing the towns to go further. There's what is now referred to as a stretch code, and we're encouraging towns to adopt this. Town of Southampton and East Hampton did take action and adopted it recently. It just sets a little bit higher bar along the lines of what Peter was describing. And by the way, the advocates for affordable housing have been leaders on this. I served on the Long Island Housing Partnership Board for a few years, and when I came in, I was right away going to say, you know, affordable housing isn't affordable if we don't design the homes right from the beginning. And everybody on the board said, yeah, Neil, we got that. So the affordable housing advocates get this message that it's really important that when you're building new homes that you're making them affordable in the long term in terms of their cost of heating and electrifying. So when you look at it, many times with big buildings, however, we have split incentives. So the builder is not necessarily the one that's going to be operating the building. So they don't have an incentive to make it energy efficient. So we do need to look at the building codes for large buildings, which are very lax. We have some beautiful large buildings that have gone up on Long Island in recent years. Almost none of them have solar. So we wrote a white paper saying that all new commercial buildings should be required to have a minimum amount of solar on the roof, and we came up with a formula for that. We haven't gotten much takers on that. You know, we're not an advocacy group. We work at the college. We write papers. We put the ideas out there. We
we can help
convene
you with
people. Yeah, we need others to sort of take the charge on things like that. I did go to a developers conference 2 years ago and asked how many in this room believe we should still be building large commercial buildings and not putting any solar on them. And no one wanted to raise their hand and admit that that's their position, and yet that's exactly what they're doing, even though it's against their economic interest. So that's another thing. We can raise the codes. Unified Solar Code is another example of a change in the code to speed up solar. We've had success with that on Long Island. Long Island actually became a leader on that, and I'm proud of the work that we did to help boost that effort. But again, we can't sit still when it comes to codes. So now we need to talk about a solar app to speed up the process of solar getting adopted locally. So there are things local government can do. A big part of it's going to be EV charging stations now. We're seeing this growth projection that is just enormous in terms of the adoption of EVs. If you look at what people are paying and you consider that LIPA's time of day rate makes it incredibly cost effective. You know, people love to complain about the price of gasoline, but the same people that do that often are anti-electric vehicles. It's hard to follow the logic there. You can save with these, you know, time-of-day pricing where you're charging your car overnight. You can, some folks that are driving inefficient cars, and I'll end on this, could actually be spending about 1/4 of what they're currently spending on gasoline if they were using EVs. And that's before you get to the question of putting solar on your roof in addition to having the EV charger in your garage. So there's a lot local government could do to promote these solutions. There is a program called Clean Energy Communities, which is something that we help to promote. It's a NYSERDA program. And there's another program called Climate Smart Communities. And both of those are programs I urge any town officials, village officials. By the way, the town of Hempstead is a clean energy community. They adopted the 4 actions that you need to get to at least 4. And, you know, street lights, at least 50% of their street lights were turned into LED lights. So there are a lot of things local government can do, and local government is doing them on Long Island. There was a sort of a message here today that Long Island can be a leader on a lot of these things. I firmly believe that. We're the only part of the state that has HERS rating required. It's ridiculous that the state building code. The State Building Code Council needs to be completely revamped. It's a disgrace. They did do some legislation this past year, so we're hoping there's going to be some improvement there. But HERS rating should be required statewide. Have had a success with it on Long Island for 10 years now. Come on, the rest of the state, when are you going to get your act together? So I could go on, but I'll stop.
Is it true that you take a private jet to commute to Malloy University?
No,
Electric, right?
I drive a hybrid. I live in an apartment, so I can't do the full electric yet, but I do drive a hybrid.
Terrific. So Julie, the state and region have set big, bold goals for offshore wind particularly. What I want to hear from you is, how are we doing meeting those goals, and really what else needs to be done to accomplish them?
Sure. So offshore wind is one of my favorite things to do, talk about. It's exciting here that the state of New York has been so invested. We have a statewide goal of course, all this will be downstate, but of 9,000 megawatts of offshore wind by 2035. We are about halfway there already with projects that are already under contract. I was very delighted to be there with the governor when the groundbreaking occurred earlier this year for South Fork Wind, which is the first commercial project in the state of New York. And it's relatively small, but we have then on top of that 4 more projects that are already underway in the permitting process. And that's truly exciting. We have Ørsted and Eversource doing South Fork Wind and Sunrise Wind, and we have Equinor doing Empire Wind 1, Empire Wind 2, and Beacon Wind, which is going to bring offshore wind in from Massachusetts and Rhode Island and through the Long Island Sound into New York City. So we have a lot happening, but more than that, the federal government, through the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, just issued a new lease in the New York Bight. For anyone who doesn't know, that's the area south of Long Island and east of New Jersey. So we share this space with New Jersey. And I will tell you that I am not going to let New Jersey outwind New York, right? New Jersey announced in the state of New York with the governor of the state of New York that they're going to go up to 11 gigawatts of offshore wind. I assure you that I and some of my colleagues will be pushing for New York to go bigger than that when the governor, whoever the governor shall be in January, goes forward. So we're certainly pushing for at least 12. So all of you who are working in offshore wind, I think there's a lot more that's happening. The fact is that there are great opportunities with organized labor, and I think that the unions, have been great supporters, and they've worked with the companies to make sure that you're using union labor to move forward. We think that's really important for the very point you made about making sure that we have good family-sustaining jobs as part of our clean energy future. We know that the IRA, the ineptly named IRA, will provide more investments for supply chain here in the United States, in the Americas, not just the United States, but also in Canada and Mexico. So that is super exciting because we want to make sure that we're making all the parts, because manufacturing is where we're going to get a lot of our jobs, and there's a lot of opportunities for parts to be made. It's not all about the blades and the turbines. There's a lot of parts that need to support those bigger pieces that are real opportunities on Long Island, and I think that's really important to do. And I think that the industry must and has begun to work with the fishing community. We know how important that industry is. It's a historic, Long Island bred industry that we need to make sure there are opportunities for people to work together, because there's no reason why clean energy and a vibrant fishing industry can't work hand in glove. So that is certainly an area where we need to make sure that we're working to make sure that those two industries work next to each other, side by side. I think last is we can't let the perfect be the enemy of the good in any of this. And it was a big uphill battle to get the power line to bring offshore wind to shore in South Fork. It's going down a small beach road where nobody is in the winter, except during COVID, where they're undergrounding power lines that were previously above ground. And there was a lot of misinformation being spread. So it's like we need to make sure that we're going out and supporting clean energy projects, because my experience when I was a regulator at the Department of Environmental Conservation is that when people are for things, they just think, oh, the government's taking care of this. But when they're against things, they come out in force. And I think in this case, we need to make sure that the forces of yes are more vocal than the forces of no, because I do think that the silent majority often kind of sits on the sideline. And this is a real opportunity to have much more stable energy prices by having renewable energy that's not reliant on the roller coaster ride that is fossil fuel prices.
Thank you. Pradeep, we heard about the investments that National Grid is making. And I think a big question that a lot of people want to know is how National Grid will make sure that clean energy is affordable for your customers now and into the future. So if you could talk to that, I would appreciate it.
Great question. Thanks, Joe. So at National Grid, right, we have approximately half the customers are electric customers and half are gas. So 3.5 million customers are electric and 3.5 million on gas. What that gives us is an opportunity to take a pragmatic look. What is practical, what is affordable, right? We are not passionate towards electrons, we are not passionate towards molecules. What we are passionate is to make sure the cost of energy is affordable. What we are passionate is to make sure the energy transition is equitable across all our customers, right? The challenge of our current generation is climate change. How can we mitigate that? And we all have the privilege in working and make it happen. What is very important is to have our sights on the problem. It's not the emissions coming from the tailpipe. Instead, it's the emissions coming from the life cycle of how energy is getting produced, how it's going to get it delivered, right? When we say, right, my customers use 3 times more energy on heating than electric, right? The very simple logic is on a hot day, your air conditioner is 70, 72, and the outside temperature is 90, 95. So all you have to do is reduce the heat by 25 degrees. But on a cold day, if you want it to be at 68 and the temperature is 20, you actually have to bring it up 48 degrees up. It takes more energy. It's a very simple logic why our customers rely more on heat, right? And when we talk about energy, how much energy we have, on Long Island today, we are sitting at 7,500 megawatts of storage on underground assets. So when we are looking at decarbonization, we are decarbonizing the fuel that is getting delivered. And we use a couple of tools, right? Not the only tool that we have. Electrification plays a major part, but not the only part. Because if we electrify today, and if that electrification is coming from a power plant generation, we are actually increasing the emissions by 2.5 times, right? And the cost of energy today on a kilowatt hour of electricity is almost 4 times expensive than what is delivered through pipelines. So what exactly are we doing? The very first one is green hydrogen, right? And green hydrogen is not something new for New York. We had it in the 1950s. We had, at the time, called manufactured gas. The problem was not the hydrogen, but the problem was how it was manufactured. It was manufactured using coal, right? And that was leading up more emissions. As we got more fossil fuel, people started transitioning to 100% natural gas. Now, with New York making commitments, and we are investing in offshore, we are investing in solar, there will be times when there is more energy generated than it is consumed. It's happening in Texas as we speak. If you look at the numbers, the producers are actually paying money for transmission companies to take the energy off, right? That's why you see the cost of energy going negative. During those times is when we rely on making hydrogen. If you look back 10 years, I really look up at Donna of Hempstead because they are the visionaries, right? 10 years before, they actually had this vision to make green hydrogen on Long Island and fuel their vehicles. Right? We partnered with them 10 years ago, and they have been making green hydrogen for the past 10 years now. True story, when I started looking at energy as affordable, how can we make it sustainable? I looked at across the globe only to find in the front yard of Long Island, Donna of Hempstead doing power to gas. And that's when I actually picked the call and called up Tara. Hey, can we do something different here? So hydrogen, we see a prominent role playing in displacing fossil fuel, right? The next one is renewable natural gas. Right? We spoke about renewable natural gas in Denmark having 30%. in all reality, it's taking waste that is otherwise emitted to the same atmosphere, capturing it and using it. The life cycle emissions in some cases is actually negative. So Newton Creek, one of the largest wastewater treatment plant, we are actually commissioning an RNG facility now. This week, we are hoping by end of this winter, actually, 3,000 homes will be using RNG to heat their homes. And similarly, we're working on other projects on Long Island, right? I can't name them as of now because we're still working with the developers. We're looking for more projects. We want to displace the energy. We want to disrupt it. The way it is coming centralized now, we want to have it decentralized. The next one that we are looking at is geothermal district heating. Right? We spoke about air source heat pump making a huge dent in the energy consumption. Geothermal, the major advantage is the temperature on the ground is always constant. And one might question, why do you have to do a district geothermal? Why not an individual geothermal? That's exactly where equitable transition comes into play. An average cost of a customer to go geothermal today is approximately 50 grand, 60 grand, right? Are we truly equitable at the time? When we say district heating means I'm actually reducing my total energy requirements. Take an example of your home. You have a refrigerator, you have a heating. The refrigerator is actually cooling inside, but it is releasing heat outside. And your home is using that heat. So the delta heat requirement goes down drastically. So on the community microgrids, geothermal is going to be very affordable, and the total energy requirement comes down. Apart from these three that we know of today, there are other two big things that we all have to collectively do, is making sure we are using energy efficiently, right? We are National Grid, we are investing significant money in reducing the energy wastage or making our homes efficient. If you look at the diversity of buildings, our homes are not only new, right? Many homes are more than 50 to 60 years old, right? So we have to invest with our customers. We can't go to the customer and say, hey, you know what? You need to go green, but you need to spend $60,000. That's absolutely not happening, right? We are customers here as well, and we take that very personal. That we are very, very obnoxious to customer costs. That's why we take a pragmatic approach. Thank you.
Thank you. So Pat, I mean, here we're talking about huge investments. A lot of it is new technologies in order to meet these goals. And you have to be thinking, I'm sure, about your workforce in terms of training, in terms of being able to sustain jobs that may be phased out, and being able to really create new long-term careers. So could you share kind of what your plans are, or what, really needs to be done to be able to maximize job creation on Long Island?
Well, first of all, we're in partnership with the National Offshore Training Center, which the Long Island Federation of Labor has been integral in helping get that facility established, and it's building as time moves on. But there is more to it. We have the greatest opportunity here on Long Island with our higher education facilities like Molloy College to create programs that will educate the next generation of workers coming in. Now, I don't want to lie to everybody here. We can't take a 50-year-old power plant worker that's been welding for the last 35 years and suddenly say, well, we're going to re-educate you and put you into a clean room in a Tesla plant. That's not going to happen. But what will happen is, as we transition, as Preet said very well, we have to take a pragmatic approach to how we transition over. And as we do that, we partner with our business partners out there. We look to work together to create a new generation of workers moving forward. Julie spoke a little while ago about how we don't need just wind turbine blades made. There's other parts that need to be manufactured. I growing up on Long Island, I remember the aerospace industry was here on Long Island. Drummond built the modules that went to the moon. We can do that now. We have the opportunity to do it. We have the real estate, we have the knowledge, and we have the ability to be able to train an entire workforce of people that can lead not just here in New York State, but all up and down the Eastern Seaboard. I'm excited about it. When I first got started in this industry, we were still burning coal in some of the plants. That's gone. We've transitioned away from that. We need to move forward, and we have that opportunity to do it. It just is going to take a commitment to move forward. And we need to work together. We all have different ideas and different things that we find is direction that we want to go in. But when we pull together, when we look to what the vision will be going forward, we'll accomplish our goals.
That's terrific to hear. I mean, listen, there should be a tremendous opportunity for job creation, for sure. So, Barika, you spoke about affordable housing, and, you know, when you need to build a certain number of affordable housing, you can't pull back based on different economic trends or different needs in terms of being green. So I'd really love to hear how new housing can be created or how legislation has to be looked at so those expenses aren't necessarily passed on to tenants that can't afford it.
No, it's a great point, and you talked about it's not easy to build affordable housing here in Long Island. It's not easy to build it in New York City either. And so the runway to do this is pretty much a minimum of 3 years, and more realistically is about 5 years from getting to a place of saying, this is what we think, we're going to acquire the site all the way to a C of O. So this is quite a long process that folks are going through. And you're sitting in a queue at various different points, right? Okay, do I have the capital to acquire? Have I been approved for my tax credits? Have I lined up my subsidy? Am I in the right place in the state's pipeline and the city's pipeline? And so that pace gets set from the time that you're like, I'm green lighting this project and we're going forward. So there aren't really the opportunities to say we're going to slow this down or we're going to speed this up. And even more complicating it is when you start that process, you're figuring out your pro forma, right? You're setting your numbers back in the beginning. We're already seeing projects struggle with the cost of inflation and how that's actually changing the price of building. So add in that when you started the project to when it's actually time to open the doors, there's a new set of mandates or something you actually want to do, right? You want to put solar in a building, or you want to have EV charging stations, or you want to do an electrified building. You have to do an electrified building. But that wasn't your plan when you started, right? And that isn't how you finance the building. And it is not an option to say, well, I am now going to pass those costs off to the tenants, and now the building will continue to cash flow, right? Because we don't want anybody operating their buildings in the red. We've seen that in COVID. We know what a complicated and very dangerous situation that is. Many different buildings across the state are still trying to figure out what to do and how to get out of that now, that still haven't recouped revenues and rent rolls given the loss of rent collection during COVID. So I think the challenge is in creating this legislation, to Julie and Neil's point, as you're going through the advocacy, as you're figuring out what your policies are, to have those conversations with the various iterations of who needs to be on board early, right? Because it's not that the affordable housing community wanted to say and has ever wanted to say no, it's just that it's very hard to turn around and say, this now is going to cost you $6 million per site, and you have no access to additional resources to do it. And we're struggling and really seeing this day by day. This NYSERDA has it's AMI, Affordable Multifamily Energy Efficiency Program, which is there in order to help existing multifamily affordable buildings take and put in place many of these energy efficiency programs. It often means that they're doing it at the cost of state government. It's in partnership with all of the various different public utilities. And actually the struggle and the obstacle right now is that many of these affordable housing developers and nonprofits don't have the capacity to put a person on in order to take advantage of the program. So it's not that the program isn't a success, it's not that everybody doesn't love it, but it's who am I gonna pull off project management or pull off underwriting in order to do this for my portfolio of my company? And the answer is people don't really have the leeway to do that. So we really have to support organizations and companies being a part of this, especially in the affordable housing community, because they are so tight and constricted.
Thank you, Barika. So back to the town of Hempstead. You talked in the conversations that I had leading up to this about partnerships with the private sector, Most recently, we're talking about the work you're doing with National Grid on delivering clean hydrogen to Point Lookout. I would love to hear about any other partnerships, whether they be public, private, that you have planned in the future.
Sure. So I guess I'll start off with the high grid program, and then I'll turn it over to Tara. But you know, the high grid program was a plan developed by National Grid and the town of Hempstead, really for to achieve two things: to decarbonize our energy and to also expand our hydrogen station. And we've been able to do that. And as we expand our hydrogen plant down in Point Lookout, we've also had the opportunity to start a pilot program where we're able to blend green hydrogen into the home heating systems of about 1,000 homes in Point Lookout. So it's something that we're hoping is going to work, and it's going to be embraced by the community, and hopefully something that we could expand throughout America's largest town into the future.
Yeah, to echo what the councilman said about high grid, these types of projects couldn't happen without these public-private partnerships, and working with folks like National Grid has allowed us to do quite a bit at our facility in Point Lookout, where we're demonstrating all different kinds of renewable technologies. To go back to the history of that original project, we did partner with National Grid in the beginning, but we also formed a technical advisory committee where we brought in all different types of private industry that could help advise us on how to develop the project, like Toyota, General Motors, and they've agreed to support us again in this next phase as we upgrade the fueling station side of things. So it's always been an important part of what we did at the Energy Park, was to form these partnerships, not only private sector, but also nonprofits. And then what we hope to do in the future also is to continue these relationships towards workforce development, which is a big part of the discussion happening today, certainly with offshore wind and any of the renewable technologies that are going to start to be transitioned to. We get to see that locally in the town with our own workforce. All the projects that we've built there, we've leveraged our talented workforce to get grant funding. Most grants, require cost share. We did that with our workforce, whether it was, helping to build the electrical, conduits for the projects. We have crane operators. We have a bulkhead crew. So all of these talented folks got to work on really interesting projects that they wouldn't have normally been able to work on if it weren't for these grants and the vision of the town and the support of the town board. So those are some of the elements that have been really important to us going forward, and also hope to continue these partnerships with the private sector to be able to have these successful projects in the town.
It's great to hear some of the doors that were opened by the initiatives that you took. It's terrific. So Peter, Barika spoke about some of the challenges with affordable housing. I think everyone can agree there's not enough affordable housing. What do you see the challenges that you're facing to implement affordable housing?
So I would also, echo, the concern about the amount of time that it takes, projects to go from, their inception to, to even, putting a shovel in the ground. I'm working on a project right now that we haven't worked on since the beginning, but that has been in development for 44 years. Now, that's rare, but 4 to 6 years is not uncommon. And, things change dramatically, from year to year, particularly in this world that we're in. But I will say that I think that the towns, particularly Hempstead and the state, I think have done a pretty good job in terms of, the initial construction and really kind of guiding us as developers into more energy efficient buildings and more green buildings. And the byproduct of that is that you have lower heating bills for the residents, therefore more affordable, better comfort, better durability, better indoor air quality for the residents. And so we're moving now from a combination of electric and gas into all electric buildings now as a result of these policies. The challenge, though, that I see is not so much on the new construction, but for the buildings that are already in existence, for the affordable buildings that were built, 5, 10, 15 years ago with the older technology that we're looking to retrofit with very limited resources. That's where I think a lot more work needs to be done to figure out how we can best transition those buildings also into more efficient buildings. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. Neil, I think you talked about putting solar on roofs, from the last question that you answered. But what significant initiative can be acted upon now on really the local level that will boost clean energy?
Well, yeah, so that is one of them. I do think, I think part of what we're talking about here today in the earlier panel also is this question of, do you mandate things, or do you, ideally, we would live in a world where people see the benefits and the transition is done in a way where it's not about regulations. Regulations are seen as a negative thing. So I get that. But nonetheless, I do think that when you look at building codes, we accept the premise that there is an energy building code. No building should be built today that is not consistent with the energy building codes. And so really the question is not whether or not there's going to be regulations, but what are those regulations? And the state building code missed the cycle. Every 3 years you're supposed to update the code. They missed one of the cycles, so we went 6 years without the code being updated. And then the update that they made was really minimal. What can be done and what's being done by many advocates is, when it comes to affordable housing, is you can build buildings that are much more energy efficient than what the code requires. So the code is just this floor. And part of what we're saying is that we should do, there's a code that was prepared by the state. There was some problems with the way they did it, but nonetheless, it does exist as a written document, and it's referred to as the Stretch Energy Code. So that can be adopted relatively easily by any local town. I mentioned there's at least 2 towns on Long Island, Southampton and East Hampton, that did adopt it. The other suggestion that we did a white paper on is to say, if you're building a commercial building, regardless of who's going to end up operating the building, because many times the builder is not the future operator, you should mandate the solar requirement, because really buildings can be around for many decades once they're built. And an analysis was done by Suffolk County a few years back of existing buildings that they owned from the perspective of putting solar on it. And if you look at the analysis, what they showed was, yes, you can put solar on a lot of those buildings and it makes good sense. But many of them, you were only getting maybe a quarter of the building with solar on it. These were older buildings with a lot of mechanicals on the roof, a lot of design features, so there was a lot of space wasted. And it's because the builder at the time of the design was not taking solar into account. Whereas if you had the mandate that said, look, you're building a new building, you're going to have to put at least a certain amount of solar on that roof, then they're going to say, well, gee, if we're going to put at least some of it up there, we're going to have to put the equipment to connect it. We might as well maybe look to maximize it. And that would drive them to go further. And so we think that, it doesn't mandate batteries, for example, but once you're putting the solar on it, you're going to say, well, maybe we should consider batteries. So there's a dynamic with the way in which building codes interact with incentives and with the economics. But it is still amazing that even buildings, we have a new cancer center that was built on Hempstead Turnpike just a few years ago. It's beautiful. It has a kind of a message of the design to the building, so when you come up to it, if you were going there for cancer treatment, you would say, wow, this is a modern building. They must have all the modern technology. You can go online and see the roof of the building. There's a photo of it online, and it shows you there's not a stitch of solar on the roof. And yet that building is using a ton of electricity every day. So the builder there is, in fact, the current operator. So it made no economic sense that they didn't put solar on the roof. And so it's kind of odd that what we're saying is we should mandate something that's in your interest to do anyway, but we're going to push you to do it because you're just not doing it. If you look at the commercial buildings built on Long Island, It's a rare exception when they include solar, and even much rarer that they would include some of the other technology we're talking about today. So I do think that needs to be mandated. I think when we look at multifamily, the question is going to come up very soon about EV charging stations, that at least some of them are going to be required. And similarly, I think if you look at the expense to go in and put in the power for the EV charging stations after the fact, rather than planning ahead for it and including it in the original design, it just doesn't make sense. So I'm a real believer that I get the argument, no one likes mandates, but guess what? We do have to mandate a lot of this stuff. That doesn't mean we should be not thoughtful about it. We should do it in a careful way and a way that makes sense. But still, I do think on some of the specifics I gave, mandates do make sense.
Thank you so much, Neil. Julie, what are the challenges to achieving net zero emission transportation, and what are some of the policies needed to achieve the objectives that the state has set?
Sure. And I just want to say, Neil, we're working on our Long Island policy agenda right now, so we'll have a follow-up conversation. So transportation is, depending on where you are and depending on how you account for the emissions, is one of the largest sources of greenhouse gas emissions. And the state has provided some of those sticks that we've talked about, right? There's a law that was passed and regulations have been implemented that require all sales of light-duty vehicles, your passenger cars and trucks, to be zero-emission vehicles starting in 2035, and for medium and heavy-duty trucks starting in 2045. But we know that there's a long way to go in order for us to get there. And the IRA includes tax credits for electric vehicles that will help a lot of people make that transition. I laugh at the gas station when I drive by it. Thank you to the Malloy College, the Malloy University here for having charging. I'm currently taking advantage of it. Thank you. So there needs to be more incentives for people to do that. I agree we need to be looking at mandates on new construction for making homes at a minimum EV ready, so that you don't have to go in and do all that new infrastructure, even if it doesn't include charging directly when you're building it. That's certainly something that's out there. There's a lot of funding in the infrastructure bill passed in 2021 that will help with the deployment of EV infrastructure. There's a focus right now through a program called NEVI that's looking at how can we get our medium and heavy duty truck fleets ready, get the infrastructure out there. This is sort of an if you build it, they will come situation, because we know that companies need to know, like if you're a trucking company, you need to know that your truck and your goods that you're transporting can get from here to there on a charge. And it's not all going to be electric. For light duty vehicles, it's probably all going to be electric for the most part. That sort of ship has sailed. It's a proven technology. The total cost of ownership, as it's referred to, is at cost parity in many cases now, and it certainly will be in the next 5 years. For medium and heavy duty vehicles, it's a lot more challenging though. We know that they require heavier load bearing. Batteries are very heavy. That adds to weight issues. We've seen this already with the Rivian, where their truck was heavier than a lot of roads allowed, so they had to update the passenger vehicle weight to allow for those vehicles because of the batteries to be able to drive on parkways. Thank you, Robert Moses. The gift that keeps on giving. So we have a lot of work to do, and I think hydrogen, is one area for medium and heavy duty vehicles that is really an option that will be out there. Fuel cells are more efficient, they're lighter, that can be used in a way that doesn't have emissions, because we want to make sure that we're not continuing to pollute through our tailpipes. We know that, and I'm sure Tristan talked about it, renewable natural gas and renewable diesel and ethanol. We could have blunted some of the concerns about gas prices in the last year by increasing to E15. We're at E10 now. And in California, in places that had that, E85 was $1 less a gallon in gas, right? Because you're not relying on OPEC. So one of the things that we've been advocating for to help provide incentives for all of these transitions, whether it's any of those fuels, is to move to a clean fuel standard, so that industry, the private sector, has the incentives to make the lowest carbon intense fuels, to help deploy them throughout our state. California and Oregon are already doing it. They've had a significant reduction in fossil fuel usage. It makes prices much more stable. With renewable and biodiesel, it's a drop-in substitute for using traditional diesel, meaning you don't need an engine for it, which we know is really important in the transition, because these are vehicles that last a long time. And we're talking about selling vehicles that are going to continue to rely on the internal combustion engine through 2035 for light-duty vehicles, and then 2045 for medium heavy-duty vehicles. So really, we need to make sure that we're looking at multiple different strategies in order for us to decarbonize the transportation sector, right? It's great to say we're going to go all electric tomorrow, but not everybody can afford to do what I did this year and buy an electric car. And even if we did, frankly, the grid's not ready for it. We are not ready for everybody to be using electric vehicles. It will be, and we have this planned transition with some of these sales mandates, but we need to recognize that and make sure that we're reducing the pollution associated with those vehicles. And we talked about it earlier, about putting those wastes to work, right? Because we're gonna always have food waste, we're always gonna have manure from farms, we're always gonna have wastewater from ourselves, from septics, and there's a better way of using that material than letting it go into the atmosphere.
Thank you so much. Pradeep, I touched with Pat a little bit on workforce, job creation. What do you see as the opportunity for Long Island, and how is National Grid creating a workforce for the future?
Oh, thanks. A great question. Long Island has a significant opportunity, right? The very reason is we use significant more energy just because most of the development happens here, right? Than the rest of US. It's a given. Now, coming to workforce, rain or shine, hurricanes, flood, who do you see, right? You will see our workforce, our union workforce, working in and out, making sure our customers have energy. Now, not much on the Long Island because natural gas system is very resilient. Even in hurricanes, it still works. But having said that, our workforce constantly develops, right? We had steel assets before, and now the technology is more plastic. Our workforce has evolved, and people know how to deal with assets. Our workforce will be upskilled. Having said that, there's also one crucial important component is when your heating system or air conditioner fails, who's the first person you're going to call? Your plumber or HVAC technicians. So they should be upskilled as well, right? So we'll be investing significantly on the community colleges. We'll be making sure they have the knowledge, right? Because it's very easy for somebody who is already working on that to grasp that additional information to make fixes easier, right? And that's a big opportunity for us. At the same time, as I initially said, we are moving from centralized energy to decentralized. What it means, we're getting significant interconnections from offshore wind. We're getting interconnections from solar, RNG, that needs additional workforce to move that energy which was not existing today. So we'll be investing more on those jobs as well to make sure the energy is safe, reliable, and affordable for our customers. So it's a huge opportunity. It's a great time to be in solving these problems for our customers. And for a community for us to solve it together is what is very important. Because that's what gets the economic development, which is as local as it gets for us. And we're taking RNG is literally waste that we're throwing away today. And look at Brian, right? He's actually making a green hydrogen electrolyzer on Long Island. So we'll be looking at companies like that. And we'll be looking at partnership with Donna Hempstead, who are forefront in making the transition happening. We'll be looking at our union workforce to actually make this transition happen. So there are many puzzles, but everything is going to come together. This is events like this where we have the opportunity to view our opinions on fact-based analysis on making what is the right thing for Long Island is a good thing. It's the best way forward for us to move forward. And thanks for having me here today.
Thank you. I don't know about all you, but I think we have a bright future here on Long Island. And again, I want to thank this panel for being here and taking the time to share their knowledge. And I want to thank all of you for being here today. And I want to thank, of course, National Grid. Have a great day, everyone. Thank you.